So welcome to everyone that is watching this again as a recording or is joining us this evening on Facebook. You've arrived at the Place of Kindness free webinar. We're here together with Zoe Ferguson from the Carnegie UK Trust, and I'm Flo Shalom from the Network of Wellbeing. We're being joined on Zoom by people from around the world actually that are working on kindness in different contexts, in their communities, in their workplaces, in a policy context, and Zoe has been working on this topic very closely, so we're really excited to have a really interactive discussion with her this evening about the place of kindness, you know, and the role that kindness can play in all of these different contexts. So yeah, thanks again everyone for joining us. I'm just going to now give Zoe a bit of an introduction and give her, and then we'll go into some of the questions. So Zoe is actually an associate with the Carnegie UK Trust, and she's been developing Carnegie's work on kindness, which we're going to learn a lot more about. She's actually got a background in public policy in Scotland, and she's had research roles in lots of different areas, and including in analysis and policy. She's worked as the Chief Social Researcher at the Scottish Government, and also she's a trustee of Cornerstone, which is a charity providing social care and support services across Scotland. So Zoe has a great background in research and also in public policy, and more recently she's really been working closely with Carnegie on looking at the area of kindness. So I wonder, Zoe, maybe just to start off with, as I mentioned to those joining us on Zoom, and I'll just reiterate for those joining on Facebook and on the recording, I'm gonna ask you a few questions, and then we're gonna have a bit of a practical exercise, and then people from the audience will have the chance to come in and ask questions. Maybe just to start off with, you could just tell us a little bit about your work on kindness at Carnegie, just to briefly introduce the background of that work, just for any that haven't come across it, which I think many have on the call, but for those that haven't.
Yeah, so the background to this work is originally from a piece of research that the Joseph Rowntree Foundation did in Glasgow in 3 communities, and all they did was to ask people to keep journals and to note down everyday interactions and acts of help and support. And what they found by doing that was just how important those kind of almost invisible network of connections and support were to people. And they got together with the Carnegie UK Trust and said, well, if this is so important to people, how would you encourage more of it? And so that's what I've spent the last couple of years looking at. How would you encourage more? And we started to talk about it as kindness, really, because that's what it kind of seemed to be to us. So so I spent a year with 7 different organisations in different areas in Scotland, looking at what kind of helps create the conditions for kindness and what gets in the way. And I'm now working very closely with North Ayrshire Council, and we have a national network looking at taking that learning and actively trying to develop some tests of change of what might you do differently.
Brilliant, yeah, and I think it's really exciting, the work that you're doing, and you know, a lot of valuable both research and reports, and also kind of practical initiatives, events and connections have come out of it. So it's really great to have the chance to talk with you about it and share it with those joining this evening. So it would be really helpful, I know that this is a topic that you covered in your latest report, looking especially at community work and how can we create kind of communities, what are the things that can be done, you know, at different levels. Maybe you could share a bit of the outcomes of your research on that.
Yeah, so I think the things that we found, and you know, I think I often kind of say when I'm doing this, is that you spend a year talking and delving really deeply into something and doing research and scratching your head and thinking about it, and then you write something that actually looks so obvious that you should have been able to guess it before you even started. But we found 3 things were kind of important in the context of communities, and the first, I think maybe is the most important one, was places, and really thinking about what kind of places do people have to gather, to come together, even just as simple as bumping into each other. I'd looked at some work that the Glasgow Centre for Population Health did, looking at how areas with very, very similar socioeconomic characteristics, housing, income, employment, all of these characteristics are very similar, but are very different in terms of social capital. And that's what I saw very much when I was going into different communities, is that you can have places which on paper are very similar and in reality and atmosphere are very different. So some might be warm and friendly, there might be apathy, people not engaging with each other, and in other areas people maybe even a kind of sense of tension. And so what was really interesting was looking at, well, why would that be? And one of the elements that seemed really important was the kind of places that people had. And what we found really interesting in that was that it's maybe not the places that you might first think of that are the most welcoming to people. So you might think, oh, fantastic, this place has got a community centre, but actually when you look into that a bit more closely, is it welcoming to all of the community, or are some people feeling that that's maybe not a place for them? And we found that in one area in particular we worked in Maryhill, that people were using the supermarket, which was a really, really large supermarket, Tesco's, and as a really important community hub for them. And there was something about that place which was really welcoming and warm, really around the people, mostly around the people, but also I think something really important about it being agenda free. People were not going in there with any expectation of getting signed up or involved in anything. It was just a place where they could be with other people. So that kind of element of place was really important. The other thing that we found was thinking about the opportunities that people have to come together, and we found that informal opportunities were really, really important. So you might think a lot around the debate of loneliness and isolation at the moment, that there's lots of calls for more activities, more groups, more organised things for people to get involved in, which is great, and we need that. But I found when I was talking to people who were lonely, isolated, and that if you ask them, do you join any groups, do you go to any activities in order to meet people, often the answer is, that's not for me. And I think often for people in those circumstances, there's a big gap between being isolated, being at home, being lonely, and taking up an opportunity to participate. So the chat in the supermarket, in the cafe, saying hello to someone in the street, these very small interactions are very important, and they have a value in themselves in terms of giving somebody an interaction during the day, but they can also build over time, build into a more significant relationship and understanding, which can then link into actually going and doing something which the person might not have thought of doing before. So I think there's that kind of informal space, very very low-key informal conversations and interactions, which are a really important kind of broker and kind of buffer between being disengaged in community and doing something more organised. And the final thing that we found really important to look at was just really questioning our values, and questioning what kind of society, communities do we want to live in, what's important to us, and really talking to people about that. And I found that people were, I think, in a general sense, felt a loss of community spirit and neighbourliness. They understood very well the reasons why that perhaps has happened, economic and social shifts that have changed the way we relate to each other in neighbourhoods, but definitely a sense that they felt that was lacking. But then interestingly also, maybe often in the next breath they'll say, and nobody's doing anything about that. So there was a sense of feeling that perhaps it's the local authority or some other organisation should be taking responsibility for providing community for us, and yet the community spirit that people talk about missing is very much more the informal, neighbours helping each other out. So those were the kind of three elements that we thought were bringing those together. Those are the things that can kind of help underpin maybe kinder communities.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and it's so interesting to learn that through your research, it wasn't exactly the places or approaches that you expected that would bring about more kindness and help to tackle loneliness, that it's actually those informal spaces that can be so valuable, and those informal ways of interacting. And yet there's this tension of, when there is that lack of community spirit, then is there a need for service provision, or in what other ways can that be offered?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was one of the real difficulties I had when I first started with this question, because I did probably that first thing that many people do, is to look at, well, what works and what evidence can I find around what works already. And what I found was just a gap in terms of the question I had, and the what works evidence, which was much more about the impact of organisations on communities, and and evidencing positive impacts that organisations have made, and much less about this kind of the relationships between individuals in communities and what underpins that. And I think that's symptomatic of the way that we think about issues. We spot problems. We often kind of pathologise them in a way. I think we are around loneliness at the moment. It's talked about as a public health challenge, and then what we do is to start thinking, and then it's the state's job to fix that, and we start talking about funding and programmes and projects which are going to fix the problem.
Yeah, and I think that people are resonating with what you're saying, and the comments Judy has said, that we're looking at town centre redevelopment, and places and spaces are such an important topic.
Yeah.
And Victoria says, we've asked people to tell us their stories of kindness, and one of our best stories was about people in the supermarket and the post office. So I think that other people working in these areas have found similar things. And just to say, those joining on Zoom, feel free to share responses in the chat box if you'd like to, as we go along. Yeah. And if people are joining us on Facebook, my colleague Roger is monitoring the Facebook, so feel free to share comments and questions that we can feed in. I think that, and just to say that the chat box is mainly for kind of comments, and the Q&A box will be used for questions at the end. So if you've got specific questions, just pop it in the Q&A box and we'll run to those at the end. But I think this is really interesting tension that you're kind of highlighting here, and it kind of links to one of the other questions we had about the relevance of kindness in a public policy context. Because of course, like you're saying, a lot of it is informal, and there's no need to kind of pathologize a problem that is maybe social and could be solved in other ways. And yet there is a challenge there, and what are there things that could be done in public policy, and if so, what, and are there things that should be done in other ways, or tackled with different approaches?
Yeah, so I think kindness is relevant in public policy debate, and I think so for the first reason it is that I think so many of the issues that we're looking at in society, it's not within the gift of government or public services to fix those problems. They maybe are part of the solution, but it's much more about thinking about our attitudes, our behaviours as individuals, our attitudes and behaviours as groups and communities, and what we do together to improve and to I guess improve well-being. I think we're talking very much, certainly in Scotland, around shifting from a welfare state to an enabling state, and I think what we mean by that is very much this idea of community empowerment and people taking control, having agency, being able to control their destiny. And I think in that context, kindness is important because to us, we're very interested in this in the Carnegie UK Trust. We've done a lot of work around the enabling state, and it seems intuitively to make sense that if you're to get genuine community empowerment, the start of that, the basis of that is people knowing and caring about the people that live around about them, and that seems to be the kind of place where you would start that. The other reason that we kind of particularly ended up talking about kindness is that I found that the word that was the most useful in terms of prompting conversation. So whether you were with a community group in Glasgow, or you're with professionals from a range of different services and backgrounds, kindness prompts conversations in a way that I think other words don't. So it's readily accessible, and people have something to say about it and understand it in a way that they maybe don't with whatever the latest buzzword jargon is around policy, and they have something to say about it. The other thing is I find really important is when I was talking to professionals, they would talk about their work, but they would also start then talking to me about their values, about what was important to them, their background, their faith, their upbringing, you know, all of these things which shaped the way in which they approached kindness. And I think there's something very important in that people are engaging with this as individuals and not just as professionals. So there's something about breaking down that kind of us and them dichotomy that we've had around public policy, that, you know, we in these fortunate positions talk about less fortunate people and what we can do about them. And I think this is much more something that is feels more like a movement that is involving people in a different way.
Yeah, I think that, like you say, it can be such an accessible conversation starter that can get people looking at topics that do have a policy relevance, but from a very personal and individuals and values-based perspective, which can lead to more honest discussions at times. So it's really interesting to hear that's the kind of experience that you had. Lots of people are sharing their views and comments, and that's really much appreciated. I'll just read out a few. Safi saying, absolutely agree, people's agency over their lives to start with is so important. It is difficult for people to be kind to others if they don't feel empowered themselves. So that's kind of relevant to what you were saying about the enabling state there, Zoe. And Julia has said, I'm reminded of Radio 4 Saturday morning programme when people write in to thank someone publicly who made a private act of kindness they may not even know about and had a huge impact. All are in public places, railway stations, supermarkets, etc. Human acts, however small, can really make the difference. I think that's a really beautiful point, Julia. Yeah. And actually that in a way links to a little exercise that Zoe's going to do with you guys shortly. Like I say, I want to bring you guys into the discussion as much as possible, and if you have specific questions you'd like us to discuss, do put them in the Q&A box. And just the last question that I had for Zoe was around creating more of a culture of kindness. So we've talked about the relevance of kindness in communities and also in public policy terms. How do you think that we can create a culture of kindness in our organisations and to some extent in our own lives, our day-to-day lives?
Yeah. So I've thought quite a lot about this, and we followed Tesco in Maryhill because in that original piece of Joseph Rowntree Foundation research, they came out completely unsolicited. People kept mentioning how important Tesco was to them as a community hub, and talked about the staff's enormous kindness. So I spent quite a lot of time there talking to staff, customers, manager of the store, regional manager, and looking at what's going on there. And there really is an absolutely extraordinary culture of kindness there. You know, every time you go, you hear these stories, and it seemed to me that the staff there are taking more risks than you might find normally. So picking up and tightly cuddling a crying child, giving out personal phone numbers to people that they're worried about and saying, just give me a call if you're worried about anything, if you need help. They're taking people home with shopping, elderly kind of customers. So there are so many stories where people are going above and beyond anything that you would call normal customer service. It's kindness. And I think what some of the things that underpin that were I think initially a kind of move from regional and kind of store managers to really listen to staff, they were very clear that they thought that improving customer satisfaction in that store would come from staff having a great day at work. So they listened to them, they asked them what would make a great day at work, and they acted on what they heard, even when that sometimes was a bit mad and seemed a bit risky. So one of the ideas that they'd had was, on Valentine's Day, they had an Elvis impersonator marrying people down the frozen food aisle, which the manager had said, right, okay, we'll just do it. So I think they took some risks around, well, what would you normally expect to see happening in a supermarket? But they listened and they acted on what people said. The other things that I think were really important were, I think, a kind of giving permission. Giving permission to people to be kind, and talking about that, having a conversation about it. Absolutely crucially, they placed trust in people to be themselves in situations and to judge situations for themselves. So they took away that kind of the set phrases that you might have somebody saying on the checkout, you know, do you need a bag, do you have a club card, and said, speak if you feel like speaking, don't if you don't. If it doesn't feel natural, don't try. Speak in your own voice, say the things that come naturally to you. And so they placed a great amount of trust in people to manage and judge situations for themselves. So those were really important. Time to do it, so take the time with people. And what's interesting is that you find customers in that store who are shopping there just because it's convenient will say, I like to see the kindness here, I like to see the kindness to older people and the time that they take with them, and I don't mind waiting longer because it's so lovely to see that. And I think, again, another vital element underpinning all of this was to look at their performance management and the kind of way that was shaping what was driving people's behaviours and attitudes. So looking at, stripping out a lot of the indicators and focusing very much on, first and foremost, what were the colleagues and the staff saying about what was making a good day, what were customers saying, and what was going on in the community. And making that the focus of their discussions in that store. So I think actually some kind of simple things that you could chant, I've talked to like so many different sectors around this, and you start talking about it going, I don't know if this is going to be relevant to you, and so many people, they'll say, yes, it's just like when we do this in a hospital or in a library or whatever it is, it's very similar.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and there are some key points there that, although taken from one context, can be relevant in a lot of different organisational contexts, particularly around kind of empowerment of individuals to kind of be themselves, giving the time, and also kind of respecting kindness as an important part of the workplace, which I think some people are resonating in the comments that when that is done in their workplaces, that is immediately noticeable, and when it's not done, then obviously then you don't feel that there's space or acknowledgement for it, and that creates a different kind of culture.
So I think there's a very important kind of point in the moment that I think we're seeing in quite a lot of organisations is it's important to have leadership and a kind of focus on values and statements about kindness being important, but it's also really, really important to look at what might get in the way of that, and look at the kind of performance management and the targets and the kind of indicators, the focus that might be pulling people away from that kind behaviour that you want to see, and to make those and to align them. And it's not enough just to have the values statement. You need to look at the kind of practical drivers of behaviour that underpin that.
And in a broader sense, this is about redefining what a kind of success looks like, because if you only see performance management in terms of bottom lines and profits, then that's one definition of success. But if you actually ingrain a sense of kindness, an open warmth as part of your definition of success, then that's going to be inevitably something that is emphasized more in people's behaviors. And I think that in a way, I really appreciated reading your report that this kind of wider societal shift away from measures of like gross domestic product, economic performance, are being kind of challenged by different, by different institutions and projects, some of whom we've featured on our webinars before. And now people are much more looking at, okay, what is really valuable in society and in our own lives, and that is things that have previously been seen as maybe softer, such as well-being, such as kindness, and those types of topics. So yeah, it was really great how you made that link in the report, and we can send around the link to the report afterwards if people want to delve more deeply into this. But one of the other main points you picked up on there, you mentioned in terms of creating a culture, was this aspect of risk and how people can be a bit risk averse, and that can perhaps create a culture of hesitancy about being kinder, and that leads us nicely into the interactive practical exercise that you were going to guide. So just to introduce that and let people know, the idea of this is just to bring your voices in a bit more and get you thinking about the discussion we've been having so far in relation to your own life and your own work. So I'll hand over to Zoe to lead that, and I'll be keeping a close eye on the chat box comments.
Yeah, so basically, I feel that a lot of what I saw, that kind of the things that stop people are this this idea of risk, and how risky do we think it is to engage with a stranger. So if you think about those examples of the way in which people are behaving in Tesco, like picking up a crying child, giving a stranger effectively a personal phone number, taking shopping home for someone, unpacking it. And when I say to them, oh, do you ever worry about doing those things? And they say, I'm just doing what anyone would do. And I think, I don't think you are. I don't see people doing that. And I wondered if people would just maybe have a think about when you might have engaged with somebody and you haven't, and what stopped you. And I know actually there's quite a lot of people, I've recognised names of people who have been engaged with this, and whether actually since they have, for those people, since they have started thinking about kindness and thinking about all of these issues, have they behaved differently in any situations like that with a stranger, and why they did that, what their experience was. So I'd be interested in thoughts on that.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that invitation, Zoe. So the question is, in terms of risk, has risk kind of put you off maybe engaging in an act of kindness, or perception of risk? And any of those of you that have been working more actively on kindness through Zoe's excellent work, or maybe through other kindness initiatives, since you've been working on that, have you noticed your kind of approach or perspective and your actions therefore kind of subtly or not so subtly changing? And would you like to share any examples? So feel free to type away in the chat box. And I think whilst people are reflecting on that, maybe I'll just share an example that comes to mind when you asked the question, Zoe, which is that I think that, of course, there's unfortunately a growing level of homelessness now in the UK, and sometimes maybe I'll be, walking past a homeless person on the street, and at previous times I might have been a bit nervous if, what would come if I started up a conversation, or would they welcome that, or is it, what's patronising and what's not. And since I've been working much more actively on issues around well-being and kindness, which is related, I've been much more likely to not only kind of give some money, but also kind of just stop and have a chat, and that can sometimes be just as appreciated by people, and that kind of personal connection is really valuable. So whereas I might have previously been a bit risk averse in that way, now I'm more open. And of course, you have a variety of experiences, but I feel generally like really positive, and a lot of kind of positive experiences have come from that.
I think we found that as well when we spoke about this at a recent meeting we had. My colleague Audrey, that I'm working with in North Ayrshire, shared a similar story of coming across somebody quite late at night in a car park, obviously a little bit under the influence, and kind of looking like somebody you might worry about going up to. And she said she might have given him some money,
But this time, you know, she kind of went over and said, look, can you take that money into that supermarket there, come out with some food for a few days, and if you do that, I'll make some calls and find you somewhere to stay tonight. And I think, you know, and he did. He came out with the food. She sorted out somewhere for him to stay. And then, interestingly, also, then there was a man in a van got out, and he said, "What were you thinking of talking to the guy? I've been sitting here for 10 minutes, not being able to drive off just to make sure you're all right." So there was a whole chain of people kind of looking out for each other. And I think, I mean, certainly I've noticed, and I think it is very subtle. But you know, talking to people in just random situations that you might not otherwise have done. I was with a friend recently, and you know, spoke to this woman, and she said, "Oh, is that one of your friends?" And I said, "No, I've never met her before. It was just somebody that I'm chatting to." So.
Yeah, and just to say, and then I'll start reading out some of your great contributions. I really like this idea again in your report about because of course there's like the sense of random acts of kindness and that being important to change people's perspective, but you also talk about these kind of non-random acts of kindness or kindness to people within your community to build up more of a culture. And I think that's really a valuable distinction, because I think that both are really needed, and creating kind of more structured ways to support those around us is you know, really important.
I guess, I mean, I suppose, you know, to be kind of really honest about this, I'm fairly sceptical about the kind of random anonymous acts of kindness and the kind of idea of paying it forward and, you know, leaving money for a coffee for the next person, when you're not, or leaving flowers for somebody and you know that you don't know, and there is no connection. And in a way, I feel like those are the things which are responding to how risky we feel it is to connect with somebody, and it's a way of expressing kindness without having the consequence or the risk that connection brings. But actually, when you look at what's going on and what the real issues are, it's the connection that's important. So I think it was Simon Anderson and Julie Brownlee who did the original JRF research, who kind of coined this phrase of not so random acts. And I think there's something, you know, I think it probably feels riskier, it probably feels more difficult if you know that is somebody in your community that you might see again. But I think those are the ones that's where the kindness really matters.
Yeah, and I think this is a whole rich other discussion. In a way, it could be, you know, both, and that, you know, of course, you know, those random acts of kindness, some beautiful things can come out of them, but actually the more structured approach to kind of building up a culture of kindness can have more of a longer term impact. So but I'll just, because lots of people are kindly sharing their thoughts, I'll just read a few out for you. So we started off with Gail saying, offering support to community members who are feeling they are being treated cruelly by health services which are struggling locally but loath to admit it. Listening to people's stories, empathising or sympathising feels highly valued, and people are so grateful. Feels good to do it. That's really powerful, Gail, and I think that maybe a lot of people would resonate with that. And
important point is that it feels good to do it. I think maybe that, you know, it's actually good, it's good for your own well-being to
and Helen says exercising non-judgment, which I think is very important in all of this work. Jackie says being involved with KIN, which is the Kindness Innovation Network, I think, which Zoe is working on, and which we can send around links to afterwards if you'd like to find out more. But Jackie says, being involved with KIN, I've noticed when I'm being kind to a stranger, previously I might have called it a random act of kindness, I'm also conscious of hesitating in offering kindness if the situation is heated. For example, a couple arguing on the train and the woman getting distressed. I think maybe in a kind of high tension situation, that can maybe be somewhat of a barrier to kindness.
I think, absolutely. And I think the whole thing here is about trusting your own judgment and your intuition about a situation. So I think we've probably come so far in a culture of managing risk out of our lives by regulation and by rules and procedures, all of which have kind of developed absolutely for valid reasons, that we tend to kind of, you know, go back to a kind of checklist approach of, should I do this, should I not do that, what would the rules say? And I think yeah, I think actually when you trust people to judge situations for themselves, as you see in that kind of Tesco example, people are very smart about how they do it and very skilled in how they manage situations and judge them for themselves. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, I think of course that's important to use judgments, and some situations are more complex than others. A few people have been commenting about the changes over time. So Margaret says she thinks there might be a generational issue here, that she was brought up to think these values of helping others and a sense of community were just kind of the way that to do things. And Donna is saying that working with young people, she's noticed that they have a kind of fear of kindness and interaction. Perhaps it's around kind of so much of our discussions being online, and things changing in that way.
Yeah, so again, I think this is a kind of common way of thinking about it. So I found lots of people talk about kindness as either something you have or you don't have, and it's something that you're brought up. Either you're brought up with it, or you don't have it. And I disagree. I think there are reason, you know, I think the general tendency is towards kindness in everyone, whether you're young or you're old, but that there are very good reasons why people don't always act in kindness or express that kindness. And so I think Donna rightly, and hi Donna, talking about the pressures on young people and the way in which they live their lives is very different. So I think so in terms of thinking about this in terms of public policy, it's important to think about what are the things that make it harder for someone to act in kindness. And if you look at the way in which the whole way in which we see risk, for example, older people will have been brought up in a time where we were less aware of it. It was less managed. And now it is much more so, and the role of the media in kind of making us so much more aware of the risks and what can happen, and then thinking about how we manage those out. So I don't think there are simple kind of reasons there that either you have it or you don't, and otherwise it wouldn't be relevant to kind of be doing anything about this. You know, you would just be saying, well, you're either kind or you're not, and you know, you live with it. I think we can do things that make it easier for people to act in kindness.
Yeah, so I think that's so true, and it's not a kind of set thing, but it's something that we can develop, and like you've shown in terms of the ways that we can change cultures and shift perceptions. So there's a lot of comments, which is brilliant, but I'm also aware of the time that we want to move towards getting to some of your questions. So yeah, thank you everyone for sharing in the chat box, and do read through each other's comments, because there's been some really amazing and valuable contributions, and yeah, it's really great to have all of you joining this discussion. So I'm just gonna move over to the Q&A box now, so that we can address some of the questions that you guys have been asking throughout the webinar, and we'll try and get through as many of those as possible. The first question from Roger about what's behind you on the blackboard, as Zoe and I already.
I am in our Carnegie UK Trust PR office. And it's something that they've been doing around trends, audience and brand. So I don't know if we could get some insider secrets on selling something.
So we're seeing right into the PR planning. Yeah. But Jackie asks, what did Tesco do to keep it agenda free and informal, but still actively promote and nurture a kind, welcoming environment? Is it a model that could easily be replicated? So referring back to the example you shared earlier from your research about Tesco and supermarkets generally being a good community meeting point, but you shared some specific examples.
So I think the whole point was Tesco didn't have to do anything to make it agenda free. They weren't specifically setting out to be a community hub. People can go into the supermarket. It's stigma free. Everybody goes into the supermarket. You know, everybody needs to go and get shopping. It's not the same as going to you know, to some kind of project where you might feel as if you know, you have a label on you if you go there. And people can also just spend time being with other people there. You know, it's not the case that you're going to go in and somebody is going to be engaged in talking to you, having you on some kind of program. I think the whole thing is they don't have an agenda because their agenda is selling food. It's not community cohesion. They're doing that as a byproduct, but they're doing such a good job of it as a byproduct that I think there are lessons to learn about what are the features of being in a supermarket that we could think about in other contexts.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And so Roger asks, how can those of us that don't work in a supermarket or in a public facing profession put kindness at the heart of what we do?
I think in lots and lots of organisations and different organisations, the way that we think about how we work, how we engage with other people at work is really important, and it has a kind of spin-off effect on how you behave outside of work. So I think that, so we have examples of, in the KIN network, we've got people looking at sharing food and how important that is, and thinking about, you know, if we think about how many of us will just grab a sandwich at our computer and that's lunch, and actually, you know, there's groups looking at taking time every day to have and keeping lunch areas for lunch and conversation with our colleagues and getting to know people. And that's, again, that's another, I always go back to Tesco Mary Hill because there's so many things that they do that are just kind of inspirational in this. But, you know, they say to anybody who's starting in that work in that store that the staff room is, you don't go on your mobile phone in the staff room because that's our place to be together and to be there for each other. And I think so that's something really important about taking the time to be present and be people that are around you. And that's important whether you're in a public facing role or not.
Yeah, and not taking our day-to-day interactions and you know, opportunities for granted, I suppose. Like you say, those simple things from how we eat our lunch and how we connect with each other while we're making a cup of tea, or, you know, can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that's important in other roles is that there are lots of roles which sit behind the public-facing one. So, you know, for example, the person who is in customer services, who is talking to somebody face to face, will have people behind them who are making the policies and the procedures that kind of drive the way that they work. So I think for those people thinking about what does that mean, what does that mean for that person, and, you know, are they able to take the time that they need? Are these rules that we're putting in place going to make it harder to do that? And thinking about the kind of end of the line and the, you know, the consequence this has on relationships is
and I think that in terms of creating these changes and shifts, Martin has commented or asked, I wonder the extent to which this begins with an inspiring individual. It might then be able to be embedded, but I wonder if it can start with the individual who inspires. So what's your view there, or your experience on the kind of...
I mean, certainly there was, I think in maybe in lots of the situations I saw, there is that kind of role of particular personalities who can either positively influence behaviours and culture or negatively, and that's a really interesting one, and I think it's important, and it's difficult to know how you could engineer that, you know, the kind of getting the positive influence as opposed to the negative influence. But I suppose in terms of you know, just thinking about it, I think, you know, people who are in leadership roles, recognising who those personalities are, giving them permission, trust, and giving them a kind of champion and prominent kind of role in making that kind of culture, normalising that culture would be important, and conversely, not letting the negative, have space.
Yeah, so allowing that space for the individuals to play a prominent role, but also creating the culture shift as well. A slightly different area of questioning here from Nadine says, kindness is going to become even more important in the context of climate change impacts, flooding, drought, rising food prices, resource scarcity. How are you including this aspect, kindness contributing to building community resilience in your work? And just to a kind of related point from Judy, she says, one thing we've noticed recently was how great our community was in the adverse weather conditions a few months ago. People offering help, going to the shops for others, checking on neighbours, etc. What we can't work out is why it's okay to be kind under these circumstances, but not okay under normal circumstances. So I guess in a way these link, because what Nadine's saying is we're going to be facing more, unfortunately, more regular extreme weather shifts. And Judy is saying, when it's really extreme, people do help each other, but how can we, how are we including this in the discussion, I suppose?
Yeah, so my answer to that is I don't know. I really don't know. I've recognised this as well, and I think that point about that kind of blitz spirit and people pull together in adversity is definitely something that we've recognised. That was one of the things that actually the Glasgow Centre for Population Health pulled out as being different about Liverpool, that Hillsborough had actually had a really significant impact in building bonding relationships, particularly across classes in that city. And so I think that's interesting, and also this point about we need more kindness. I mean, I think so there's environmentally, economically we need it as well. If we're looking at the kind of the context of growing inequality, and thinking about so I think this whole thing about questioning the values and what kind of society do we want to be in, and I think there's that kind of sense in which in growing inequality people are more individualistic, they're more materially driven, thinking about where they are in the pecking order, and the risk then of what do you lose if you are you're kind of giving to others. So thinking about it, I think, so this whole idea of thinking about it big picture is really, really important. And to be totally frank, I'm immersed in kind of North Ayrshire at the moment, looking at communities and organisations, and I don't have the answer on that, but I think it brilliant kind of way of thinking about it, and we should be thinking about it.
And I think Nadine mentioned in the chat that she was looking at this topic in more depth in some research. So Nadine, if you'd like to be in touch,
I'd be really interested to hear about that. And
because it's a really important part of the discussion and the debate. So I'm aware of the time, and we are slowly going to be drawing to a close in the next 5 minutes or so. So I'm aware that there's also still quite some questions, but I'm just going to address as many of them as we can in the closing few minutes. So Claire has asked which Tesco store you're referencing, and Jackie has said, so that's and Jackie said it sounds very straightforward, but what are the barriers preventing? I think both those questions, well, the Tesco one's quite easy to answer, but these types of questions, I'll send around the link to your report, because I think that's got so much useful information about both this example in detail, but also other examples, because I know that you included, I think it was 7 different organisations in your research, so looking at different contexts, not just the kind of supermarket or business context. So I would recommend people that want to go deeper into this to read that report. And another few people have asked about the Kindness Innovation Network, so which is something that Zoe has been involved in starting, and I'm just trying to find, but sorry, you could just quickly maybe say the Tesco branch. That question.
Sorry, the Tesco branch is Community Hill.
Great. That's brilliant. And then
is it?
Sorry?
I'd recommend a visit.
Great. And then the Judy has asked, said she wants to be involved with the Kindness Innovation Network, but she hasn't quite been able to take the time off work to come to the meetings? Are there other ways that people could be involved similar to this meeting? So just to say,
we've got an electronic network on. I can never remember the name of these things, but we have got an electronic network. The KIN network, we have now had 2 meetings, and we are continuing with the people who've already had 2 meetings. So it's actually I guess it's kind of closed at the moment because people are involved in kind of thinking about what they might do. We will share what people are doing, and we can do that. And we can do that with people using the electronic means as well. So if you just drop Carnegie UK Trust an email, and we can link you in with that, and we'll share stuff. We'll share stuff from that regularly on our website with blogs and updates. So
and just to say, we can, if it's okay with you, Zoe, we can include links in the follow-up email for those joining us on Zoom. Those joining us on Facebook can drop us a message, and we can link you up with further ways to connect. And thank you to those joining us on Facebook as well. I know Claire Brown has asked about organisations like the NHS. The staff themselves are a large part of the community, and do we have advice on promoting kindness in the workplace for them? So I think some of the points we touched on earlier about culture and workplace are really relevant in terms of that. And just to let you know, Claire, if you missed the start of the video, the whole video will be available afterwards on our Facebook page, and we'll share the recording from YouTube as well. So keep an eye out on our pages if you missed part of the discussion and would like to catch up with it more. So yeah, I'm really sorry we haven't had a chance to go through all of the questions. One thing that Zoe and I have discussed, although not confirmed, is maybe doing a further follow-up webinar in future when Carnegie brings out their next research report, or following that. So if there's enough interest and demand for that, and if Zoe is kind and willing, then we could
I've done it once. I think maybe I could cope with it again. I've not done this before. So, thank you everyone for being with me.
No, it's been really brilliant and so amazing, all of the people that have joined us, and your active comments and questions. And again, sorry that we didn't have the time to answer them all, but we'll include as much information as possible in the follow-up email. And if you have specific questions that are really key for your work and that you would really love to discuss further, then you can drop either myself or indirectly, or Zoe directly, an email. And now we're just going to close with a few short announcements. Zoe, whether you wanted to say a little bit about
just say to folk, if you look out on our website, Julia Unwin will be publishing a report soon on some roundtable discussions she's had across the UK on kindness, and we'll also be publishing a survey that we've conducted across the UK on kindness. So I think there should be some really interesting stuff in that for you to look at. So just keep your eye on the website.
Brilliant. And like I say, we'll include some of those links in our follow-up. And just to let you guys know, we do run at the Network of Wellbeing, we run a monthly webinar series, so you can join us each month for these types of discussions. They're all about building wellbeing together. So how can we learn about the different really amazing pieces of work going on across the wellbeing movement in the UK, different pieces of research, practical projects, etc. Next month, on the 28th of August, on a Tuesday evening again at 6 o'clock, we're going to be talking about happiness and wellbeing in the workplace with a guest speaker, Sherry Clark. So you're welcome to join us again. Again, I'll include the link in the follow-up email and on our Facebook page. And it's been such an amazing discussion this evening. I really look forward to, I feel like this is the start of an ongoing discussion rather than one single one. So thank you so much, Zoe, for taking the time to kindly chat with us.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah, and thank you everyone so much for joining and for your active participation. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.